A biker thought he was stopping for a dying dog on the side of the highway, but the note tied around its neck would pull him into something far darker, a message from someone who hadn't just abandoned their pet, but had been taken against their will. Marcus Grave Dalton had ridden that stretch of road 100 times before, a long, empty ribbon of asphalt cutting through dry land and silence. The kind of place where people didn't stop unless something was wrong, and even then most just kept going. But Marcus wasn't most people. Not anymore. Not after everything he'd seen and everything he'd lost. So when his headlights caught something strange tied to a crooked highway sign just beyond mile marker 47, he slowed without thinking, the low rumble of his engine fading into a cautious growl as instinct replaced routine, because out here nothing appeared by accident. Not this far from town, not this late, and definitely not something that moved the way that shape did. Barely. Weakly, like it didn't have the strength left to call for help. And as he pulled over and killed the engine, the sudden silence pressed in hard, broken only by the faint rustle of wind and the distant hum of trucks miles away. And that's when he saw it clearly. A dog, medium-sized, tied tightly to the rusted pole with what looked like a worn rope or maybe even torn fabric. Its body thin enough that every rib showed under dirty, matted fur, its legs trembling like they might give out at any second. But the thing that stopped Marcus cold wasn't the condition of the animal. It was the way it didn't react. No barking, no growling, no attempt to pull away. Just a pair of tired eyes lifting slowly to meet his, as if it had already given up on the idea that anyone would come. And for a second Marcus just stood there, helmet still in his hand, staring, something heavy settling in his chest, because he'd seen that look before, not just in animals, but in people. The kind of look that came when hope had run out and all that was left was waiting. "Hey, easy," he muttered, his voice quieter than expected as he stepped closer, boots crunching lightly against gravel, careful not to startle it. But the dog didn't flinch, didn't move at all except for a faint wag of its tail that seemed more like instinct than emotion. And that's when Marcus noticed the cloth tied around its neck, not sloppy, not accidental, but deliberate, knotted carefully like someone had taken their time. And that alone told him this wasn't simple abandonment, because people who dumped animals didn't leave notes, they didn't tie things neatly, they didn't make sure something stayed in place long enough to be found. And suddenly the air felt different, heavier, like heat. Just stepped into the middle of something unfinished, something raw. So he crouched down slowly, reaching out just enough to let the dog see his hand. And after a moment the animal leaned forward slightly, pressing its head weakly against his fingers as if recognizing help when it finally came. And Marcus swallowed hard before reaching for the cloth, fingers working carefully at the knot until it loosened, revealing a folded piece of paper tucked inside, worn but protected, like whoever left it had made sure it wouldn't fall apart before someone found it. And for a second Marcus hesitated, because something in his gut told him that whatever was written there was going to change things, that this wasn't just about saving a stray anymore, that this was about to become something else entirely. But he unfolded it anyway, eyes scanning the words in the dim light of the highway, and as he read, the world seemed to narrow down to just that page, just those sentences written in uneven but controlled handwriting. "Please don't leave him. His name is Rusty. I had no choice. If you're reading this, something has gone very wrong. They took me. I don't know where I am. I tried to come back for him. I couldn't. Please, don't let him die here." And Marcus didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink for a few seconds after finishing, because the words didn't just sit there. They hit, hard and immediate, echoing in his head in a way that made the empty highway feel suddenly dangerous, like eyes might be watching from somewhere beyond the darkness. "They took me," he repeated under his breath, the phrase sounding heavier the second time, more real, and he looked back at the dog, at Rusty, who was still watching him with those same quiet, exhausted eyes, trusting, without question. And something clicked into place in Marcus's mind, something that turned a simple stop into a decision he couldn't walk away from. Because this wasn't someone giving up a pet. This was someone leaving behind the only thing they could protect, the only message they could send, hoping that whoever found it would understand, would do something, would not just read and move on. And Marcus had spent years trying not to get involved, trying to keep his world small and manageable. Just the road, the bike, and the silence in between. But standing there with that note in his hand and that dog at his feet, he knew that wasn't an option anymore. Because somewhere out there was a person who had written those words under pressure, under fear, and had still thought about their dog, still taken the time to make sure it had a chance, and that kind of thing didn't happen by accident. It meant something. It meant there was a story behind it that hadn't ended yet, and Marcus exhaled. Slowly, folding the note back up with more care than he expected from himself before slipping it into his jacket, then reaching down to untie the rope from the pole, his movements steady now, decided. "All right, Rusty," he said quietly, his voice carrying a firmness it hadn't had moments before. "Looks like you and me. We've got somewhere to be." And as the rope fell away and the dog leaned against him like it had been waiting for that exact moment all along, Marcus realized that whatever road he thought he was on tonight had just changed completely, because he hadn't just found a dog tied to a sign. He'd found the beginning of something bigger, something darker, and whether he liked it or not, he was already in it. The note should have been the end of it, just a strange, unsettling moment on an empty highway. But for Marcus it became the beginning of something he couldn't ignore, because by the time he got Rusty back to the clubhouse, the dog hadn't left his side once. Not even when the others gathered around asking questions. Not even when a bowl of food was placed right in front of him, and he only sniffed it before turning back toward the door, like he was still waiting for someone else to walk through it. And that detail stuck with Marcus more than anything, because animals didn't fake loyalty like that. They didn't hold on to hope unless it meant something. And as he laid the folded note on the table under the dim yellow light, the room shifted from casual curiosity to something quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that came when everyone realized at the same time that this wasn't random. "Read it again," one of them said, and Marcus did, slower this time, each word landing harder than before. "Asterisk, they took me. I don't know where I am. I tried to come back, asterisk." And nobody spoke for a few seconds after, until someone muttered, "Could be a setup." But Marcus shook his head immediately, his eyes still on Rusty, who had now moved closer to him, pressing against his leg like it was the only safe place left in the room. "No," Marcus said quietly. "That's not fear writing, that's control." Whoever wrote this was trying not to panic, and that detail mattered, because it meant the person was thinking clearly even in whatever situation they were in. And that meant there was more to this than a random grab or a desperate lie. It meant intention, and intention meant there would be traces, clues, something left behind whether whoever took them realized it or not. And Marcus had spent enough years around trouble to know that people always left something behind, even when they tried not to. But what he didn't expect was that the first real clue wouldn't come from the note. It would come from Rusty himself, because sometime later, while the others argued quietly about whether this was worth getting involved in, the dog suddenly stood up and started pacing again, not aimlessly this time, but with purpose, moving straight toward Marcus's jacket hanging over the back of a chair, whining softly, scratching at it. And at first Marcus thought it was just attachment, but then Rusty kept nudging the same spot over and over again, the lower pocket, persistent, almost urgent. And that's when Marcus frowned and stepped forward, pulling the jacket closer, reaching into the pocket where he was sure he'd already checked earlier. But his fingers brushed against something small, something folded tight, and pushed deep enough that it wouldn't have been noticed unless someone was specifically looking for it. And his chest tightened slightly as he pulled it out, unfolding the second piece of paper carefully. The edges more worn than the first, like it had been hidden longer, and the handwriting was the same, no doubt about it. But this time there were fewer words, just an address and a single line beneath it. "If he finds you, trust him." And Marcus stared at it longer than he expected, because that line didn't make immediate sense, not fully, but it felt deliberate, like part of something bigger, like a message meant for someone specific, maybe not even him. And that realization shifted everything again, because it meant Rusty hadn't just been left behind randomly, he'd been left as a messenger, as a link between whatever had happened and whoever was meant to follow it. And somehow Marcus had stepped into that role, whether by chance or by design. And when he looked down at the dog again, Rusty was watching him with a focus that almost felt human, like he was waiting for Marcus to understand, to act, to follow through on something his owner had started but couldn't finish. "You were supposed to lead someone," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, but the dog's tail gave a faint whack, just enough to confirm it. And that was all Marcus needed, because the hesitation that had been there before, the question of whether to get involved, was gone now, replaced by something steadier, something heavier, responsibility. And within the hour he was gearing up again, the address memorized, the note tucked safely inside his jacket, and the others watching him with mixed expressions, some skeptical, some concerned, but a few understanding exactly why he couldn't walk away, because sometimes it wasn't about proving something or chasing trouble. Sometimes it was just about not ignoring the moment when it found you. And this had found him, no question about it. And the ride out the next morning felt different from the one the night before. The road no longer empty, but filled with quiet tension. Every mile bringing him closer to whatever waited at that address. Every turn making the situation feel more real, until finally the highway gave way to a narrower road, then gravel. Then a long stretch of land that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, and at the end of it stood a house, small, worn down, windows cracked, the front door slightly open, moving just enough in the breeze to make a soft, hollow sound. And Marcus slowed his bike to a stop, cutting the engine as the silence settled in again. But this time it didn't feel calm. It felt wrong, like the kind of quiet that came after something had already happened. And as he stepped off the bike and approached, every instinct he had sharpened, telling him to be careful, to expect something, but the outside told him nothing. No obvious signs of a struggle, no broken glass scattered across the yard, no tire marks that stood out, just stillness, too much of it. And when he pushed the door open and stepped inside, that's when everything changed, because the inside told a completely different story. Furniture overturned, a chair lying on its side near the wall, a table pushed halfway across the room like it had been shoved hard, a mug shattered near the doorway, pieces still scattered as if nobody had bothered to clean it up. And Marcus moved slowly, scanning everything, taking it in piece by piece, because this wasn't random damage, it was contained, focused, like something had happened quickly, and then stopped just as suddenly. And near the far wall he noticed a phone lying face down, the screen cracked but intact enough to suggest it had been dropped, not destroyed, and he crouched down, picking it up, pressing the power button out of instinct even though he already knew it wouldn't respond. And as he set it back down his eyes shifted to the wall beside it, narrowing slightly as he noticed something faint, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Scratches, shallow but deliberate, not the kind made by accident. And he stepped closer, running his fingers lightly over them, following the pattern until it formed something clearer. 3 letters carved unevenly but intentionally into the paint, WHS. And for a moment he just stared at it, his mind already working, already connecting dots that weren't fully visible yet, because those letters weren't random. They were left behind for a reason, just like the dog, just like the notes, just like everything else. And Marcus stood slowly, stepping back as the weight of it settled in, because this wasn't just a disappearance anymore. It was a trail, and whoever had taken Rusty's owner either didn't realize she was leaving it or didn't think anyone would follow it. And Marcus exhaled quietly, his voice low but certain as he said, "Not what? Who?" And in that moment he understood something clearly for the first time since he'd stopped on that highway. This wasn't going to be simple, it wasn't going to end quickly, and whatever WHS stood for, it was the next step. The next piece of a story that was getting bigger with every mile, and Marcus was already too far in to turn back. By the time Marcus stepped out of that house, the letters carved into the wall had already taken root in his mind, repeating over and over like a code that refused to stay meaningless, because he knew now this wasn't about guessing anymore. It was about finding out who, or what, WHS really was. And that meant calling in favors he hadn't touched in years, digging into connections he'd deliberately left behind when he chose a quieter life. But some doors never fully closed, and by nightfall he was back at the clubhouse, the air thick with tension as he laid everything out, the notes, the address, the scratches on the wall, every detail lined up like pieces of something none of them fully understood yet. And while some still doubted, the mood had shifted, because this wasn't just a strange story anymore. It had structure, intention, and that made it dangerous. WHS isn't random, Marcus said, his voice steady, controlled. It's a name, or part of one. And after hours of calls, digging, and piecing together fragments from people who owed them favors or knew how to look where others didn't, something finally surfaced. Not a clean answer, but enough to change everything. WHS wasn't public. It wasn't something you'd find on records or directories. It was whispered, buried, tied to a private security operation that handled jobs no one wanted traced. Off-the-books work that existed in the gray areas between legal and invisible. And more importantly, they had a temporary holding site set up not far from where Marcus had found Rusty, an old warehouse sitting isolated beyond a stretch of unused industrial land. The kind of place nobody questioned because nobody went near it. And when that information hit the room, the decision came fast. No more debate. No more hesitation. Because now it wasn't about possibility. It was about action. And Marcus didn't waste time waiting for permission that wasn't coming. Because whatever was happening out there, it wasn't official, and it wasn't going to stop on its own. And somewhere in that warehouse was the person who had written those notes. The person who had trusted that someone would follow the trail, and Marcus wasn't about to prove them wrong. So that night the engines roared again, louder this time. Not just one bike cutting through the darkness, but several, moving with purpose, with direction, the road stretching ahead under a sky that felt heavier than before. And back at the clubhouse, Rusty paced restlessly, refusing to settle, whining low and constant like he could feel something shifting, like he knew they were getting closer. And miles away the warehouse stood lit against the darkness, too bright, too active for something meant to stay hidden. And Marcus slowed as they approached, eyes scanning every angle, every shadow, taking in the layout, the entrances, the movement, because this wasn't a place you rushed into blindly, but it also wasn't a place you waited outside forever. And after a moment, that felt longer than it was, he nodded once, and everything moved at once, fast, controlled chaos breaking through the artificial quiet as they pushed inside. The first crash shattering the stillness, followed by shouting, footsteps, confusion, the kind that came when something unexpected hit hard, and without warning. And Marcus moved through it all with focus, not stopping, not hesitating, pushing past the noise and resistance, because he wasn't there for a fight. He was there for one thing, one person, and every second mattered. And then he heard it, faint at first but unmistakable, a voice, weak, strained, coming from somewhere deeper inside the building. And that was all he needed, because he followed it without thinking, down a narrow hallway, past closed doors, until he reached one at the end. And for a split second everything slowed, the noise behind him fading, the moment narrowing to just that door. And then he kicked it open, the sound echoing as it slammed against the wall, revealing a small, dimly lit room where a woman sat on the floor, wrists bound, her face pale, but her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. And for a moment neither of them moved, the silence stretching between them as recognition tried to catch up with reality, until her gaze dropped to Marcus's hand where he still held the folded cloth, Rusty's note, and everything changed in her expression, disbelief breaking into something deeper, something raw. "You found him," she whispered, her voice barely holding together, and Marcus stepped forward, already, reaching down to cut the restraints, nodding once. "Yeah, he's safe." And the moment the words landed she broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet, uncontrollable way that came when fear finally let go, shoulders shaking as relief replaced whatever had been holding her together until now. And Marcus didn't rush her, didn't push, just worked quickly, freeing her hands before helping her to her feet, steadying her when she nearly stumbled. I thought I left him to die," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of it, and Marcus shook his head slightly, his tone firm but calm. "You didn't. You left a trail." And that truth settled between them, grounding the moment, because everything she had done, every choice she had made under pressure, had led to this, to someone finding her, to someone refusing to ignore it. And minutes later they were moving again, out of the warehouse, away from the chaos still unraveling behind them, back into the open night where the air felt different now, clearer somehow, and the ride back felt shorter, lighter, even with everything that had just happened, because there was a direction to it, an end in sight. And when they finally pulled into the clubhouse, Rusty didn't hesitate for a second. The moment the trap door opened he ran, fast and certain, straight toward her, all the hesitation and weakness gone in an instant, and she dropped to her knees just in time to catch him, holding him close as if letting go wasn't an option anymore, tears falling freely now as she buried her face in his fur, apologizing over and over in a voice that carried both guilt and overwhelming relief. And Marcus stood off to the side, watching quietly, the weight of everything settling into something steadier, something complete, because the road that had started with a single stop on a quiet highway had led here, to this moment, to a connection that hadn't been broken no matter what tried to tear it apart. And as the night settled around them and the engines finally went silent, Marcus understood something he hadn't expected when he first saw that shape tied to a sign. Sometimes the smallest things weren't small at all. Sometimes they were the beginning of something bigger than you planned for. Something that pulled you in whether you wanted it to or not. And sometimes, if you followed it all the way through, it led you exactly where you were supposed to be, because he hadn't just found a dog that night. He had found a story that needed an ending, and for once, he had seen it through.